And now I'm very happy to give the floor to Professor Salska. Well, we have had the honor of listening to Professor Salska for several times already. On the handouts, welcome, good morning, first of all. On the handouts, you have the copies of the poems, text of the poems that I will be talking about. And before I start, I wanted to explain why I want to talk about those poems. First of all, and I have talked since I came to a number of colleagues. First of all, it seems that it's, increasingly as teachers of literature, we find ourselves in the situation where we cannot help for our students to read long texts. Okay. So personally, I find myself more and more working on short texts in the classroom, so that at least we can have the text in front of our eyes and discuss the text. And do with it what we can, learning not only the language, but also using the text as a key to all sorts of issues, aesthetic, historical, cultural. My other reason for taking those poems is because I think this is a genre of a poem that is pretty characteristic of American literature. I'm not aware of a corresponding genre, for instance, in my own literature, in Polish literature. I'm not aware of the popularity of this genre in your literature either. It connects, on the one hand, the tradition of America as nature's nation, as Perry Miller said, and the tradition, the new tradition of environmental imagination, as Lawrence Buell said, on the one hand. And on the other hand, this tradition of images, right, of this revolution in early 20th century that use the image description to talk, to lead into some kind of psychological, spiritual insight. So these are my reasons. Poems are by women poets because I think women tend less to mythologize the animal, right? And you think of Ted Hughes's Crow, or what Galway Kinnell does in when one has lived a long time alone, which is a beautiful poem, but uses the snake image completely metaphorically. Here, there is this collision of, on the one hand, trying to do justice to the living organism, to the animal, to be precise, and on the other hand, to think of the relationship, of perception, how we perceive the external world, and of the relationship between man and nature, and nature and culture. The most popular living American poet today. All kinds of internet discussion groups, individual websites and blogs, as well as community portals, quote her poems and comment on them. Her work elicits response from ecologists of various shades, from spiritual seekers and confirmed church members of different denominations. And I even found a sermon on the internet with a text from Mary Oliver. She's popular among college students and general readers of poetry. Oliver's poems have even served as guide to Provincetown and its environs in the travel section of the New York Times in July of 2009. On the other hand, the poet has gained critical respect. Right? This is, I think, a new thing, right? Because after this estrangement of the reader by high modernism and its aftermath, right? Now I think that the wave is turning, and writers try to regain the reader. So her poetry on the one hand, is popular, on the other hand, it gained critical respect. Her 1982 collection, American Primitive, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, and volume 1 of her new and selected poems that came out in 1992 won the National Book Award. Somewhat like Emily Dickinson, Mary Oliver seems today that rare kind of poet who can straddle the abyss deepening in the course of the 20th century between poetry acclaimed by critics and poetry popular with the reading public. Her art reconnects professional and general tastes, and perhaps because of that, it attracts attention as a new phenomenon on the American poetic scene. Like Dickinson, too, Oliver is often charged with excessive sentimentality, but while Dickinson was most often censored by her early editors and critics for obscurity of meaning and irregularities of form, Oliver is usually criticized for lack of ironic distance from her subjects and for a tendency to overt didacticism, characteristics obviously at odds with the aesthetic preferences of our time. Mary Oliver is a lover and a keen observer of New England's natural life. Born in Ohio, she attended both Ohio State University and Vassar College without earning a formal degree. Instead, she educated herself in the wetlands of Cape Cod, having settled there in the 1960s with her life and business partner, Molly Malone Cook. They ran a bookshop in Provincetown and left the place only when Oliver taught at Case Western University and Sweetbriar College. Like Dickinson, Oliver protected the privacy of her personal life and shunned publicity. Only in 1992, on the occasion of receiving the National Book Award, did she acknowledge openly and with gratitude her lesbian partnership with Molly Malone Cook. Cook's death in 2005 elicited from Oliver a series of poignant love and mourning poems and a memoir of their life together with photographs by Cook, published as Our World in 2007. Still, death has been one of Oliver's important themes from the beginning of her career, just as it had been important for her great romantic predecessors, Whitman and Dickinson. Thoreau-like, Oliver places nature in the center of her lifestyle and of her poems, seeking in the intimate relationship with nature intellectual and spiritual nourishment for herself and her art. While her focus on New England's nature connects her poetry with current American nature writing, not so much in its conservationists and managing aspect, the tradition of Aldo Leopold, as in its spirituals and religious concerns that links her back to the Romantics, as we said. It also links her work to the Transcendentalist tradition. Seeking intimacy with nature is for Oliver, as for Thoreau, related to the fundamental desire to front only the essential facts of life, to put to rout all that was not life. It's, of course, Walden. So as to front the essential facts of life, so as to foreground the extent to which man is a part and participant in the cyclic processes of nature. Already in 1972, in Going to Walden, Oliver wrote, "Going to Walden is not so easy a thing as a green visit. It is the slow and difficult trick of living and finding it where you are." Practically all her reviewers and critics have commented on the rootedness of Oliver's work in Romanticism. In the present paper, I would like to look at just one motive in her nature poetry. Oliver is a keen observer of animal life, so that poems with various animals in their center form a substantial part of her oeuvre. Focusing on a couple of her snake poems, I want to examine Oliver's work in the context of similar poems by her eminent predecessors, Dickinson and Marian Moore, because I see Mary Oliver's poems as a recent addition to what seems an ongoing conversation in the strong tradition of modern American poetry by women. Since Emily Dickinson, one can trace a clear sequence of poems by American female authors exhibiting close attention to various strange, wonderful, amusing, or awesome creatures of nature. And I'm thinking, for instance, of Elizabeth Bishop. I'm sure you all are thinking of Bishop and her much anthologized poems, The Fish or The Moose. Even The Moose is, with his sudden appearance out of the mysterious other world. And also of a new poet that I have come across, Kate Ryan, a California poet who has, those wonderful, whimsical, closer to Moore descriptions of animals. Displaying their artistic accomplishments, their authors traced in those poems, in Robert Frost's words, the line where man leaves off and nature starts. It's New Hampshire. They also talk to each other across time about changing relationship between men and other living creatures, about the art of poetry and its functions. Each of the three poets is a careful and well-informed observer of nature's people. One cannot think of Dickinson's poems without remembering there are many birds, butterflies, grasshoppers, but also there are flies and spiders and snakes and bats. Marian Moore actually graduated in biology from Bryn Mawr, and poems about animals are widely considered the hallmark of her poetry. I want to read two of Oliver's poems on snakes against two snake poems by her distinguished predecessors. My focus on the snake poems is motivated by the fact that among natural creatures, the snake is perhaps most heavily burdened with cultural associations and symbolism. Writing about the animal, the poets simply have to conjoin their personal vision with, on the one hand, a naturalist obligation of fidelity to physical detail, and on the other, inherited cultural meanings imposed on the creature. In the Christian tradition, too, the confrontation between woman and snake is of especially strong symbolic significance. Thus, the snake as a subject of poems by female authors almost necessarily becomes the site where nature, culture, and individual response get entangled in complicated ways. So here is Mary Oliver's The Snakes. A poem comes from her Pulitzer Prize volume, American Primitive. And American Primitive, I want to add, is used to my mind in the double meaning. American Primitive as a return to the natural, right, to America before European civilization conquered it. This encounter with unspoiled nature. And on the other hand, American Primitive is also a term in art history, or in art, referring to naive American paintings, kind of folk art, naive art. So the implication is a return not only to the natural object in itself, but to a vision that is not unsophisticated vision, right? Let's put it that way. So here is the poem. I once saw two snakes, northern racers, hurrying through the woods, their bodies like two black whips, lifting and dashing forward in perfect concert. They held their heads high and swam forward on their sleek bellies. Under the trees, through vines, branches, over stones, through fields of flowers, they traveled like a matched team, like a dance, like a love affair. Grammatically, the whole poem, like the body of a snake, is of a piece. It is a single sentence divided by semicolons into parts signaling consecutive stages of the speaker's progress, from perception through attentive observation to reflection. The poem enclosed within a frame of a comparison formed by its first and last sentence. I once saw two snakes like a love affair. That comparison. describes in sharp detail the memorable sight so as to justify the speaker's surprising equation of the concrete animals with generalizing abstraction. Like the snakes, the poem travels, transferring their specific physical qualities into the abstract concept, incorporating the ideal of a relationship in their nimble bodies, making the invisible visible. That seeing two snakes was an event to remember is signaled in the poem's very title, not just any snakes, but the snakes, special and striking. Snakes are solitary creatures, and seeing a pair of them traveling together is indeed a rarity. Accordingly, the first line announces somewhat proudly, "I once saw two snakes." It is an achievement of an expert nature watcher who was allowed a privileged glimpse into nature's secret life. The snakes are specified as northern racers, and if you look at the description of northern racers, what each description in encyclopedias and in sort of biology websites stress the quickness, the curiosity of the snake, and the fact that they are often seen with their heads up, right? Moving with the heads up. So the snakes are specified as northern racers, made visible for the reader who may be unfamiliar with the species in the image of black whips synthesizing their shape, color, and rapid movement. They are dashing forward in perfect concert, and the speaker's delighted recollection recreates in the poem's line the sound patterns, the ease and grace of their swift course through the changing terrain. The description culminates in a triple comparison whose ascending order, like a matched theme, like a dance, like a love affair, ends the whole with an ecstatic vision of perfect grace, perfect unity of movement, purpose, and feeling. At this point, it is difficult to overlook strong sexual symbolism attaching to the snake in Western culture. However, even if Oliver's two snakes, dashing forward in perfect concert, hint at the personal lesbian subtext in the poem, the admiring tone of her description works against the cultural prejudice towards same-sex partnership. In such a reading, the poem not only rehabilitates the creature aesthetically, but reverses its culturally accepted symbolism. The text is very accessible. It does not ask readers to puzzle out its meaning. It only asks them to look and enjoy, to appreciate the sight of the gracefully flowing animals and the flowing craftsmanship of the poem's artful simplicity. Like the snakes, Water Snake opens with the speaker-observer's recollection. "I saw him in a dry place on a hot day, a traveler making his way from one pond to another, and he lifted up his cherry face and looked at me, with his gravel eyes, and the feather of his tongue shot in and out of his otherwise clamped mouth. And I stopped on the path to give him room, and he went past me, with his head high, loathing me, I think, for my long legs, my poor body like a post, my many fingers, for he did not linger, but touching on the other side of the path, he added in long lunges and quick heaves straight to the nearest basin of sweet black water and weeds and solitude, like an old sword that suddenly picked itself up and went off swinging through the green leaves." Noting the surroundings, the speaker realizes that the snake is out of his natural element. He needs to get back to water. He has a purpose and a destination of his own, and no design on the human intruder. The emphatic description of the snake's determined progress on his own way draws attention to the implied difference between the speaker's encounter with the water snake and the biblical story of the first woman meeting with the snake. And I think the and constructions, right, constitute a stylistic hint to the Bible, to the language of the Bible. except for the wonderfully pictured movement of the feather of his tongue. The water snake's mouth was clamped. He was not going to speak and ignored the observer. Still, she thinks that like the biblical snake, he too must have hated her, not because he was jealous of her privileged position, but on the contrary, because her body appeared to him poor and awkward in comparison with his sleek shape. Like the earlier snake poem, this one ends in a comparison when the snake disappears from view like an old sword. When I talked about the poem with different groups of readers, the opinion seemed to prevail that the author should have stopped with the snake going off to solitude. Yet read with the biblical myth of the temptation of Eve in mind, the image of the snake as an old sword disappearing through the green leaves ends the poem with the snake not only uninterested in the human creature, but with the dangerous confrontation sidestepped, the potential conflict diffused, yet with the speaker nevertheless left outside the hidden life of nature. And since I wrote this, I found out that the sword and a snake in emblem literature, right, figures in emblem literature as the sign of conflict. The snakes in both poems are made visible and real for the reader with the poet's knowledge and understanding of the habits showing unobtrusively but clearly. As presented by Oliver, snakes are not anomalies, deviant intruders in nature's paradise. They are its integral part, even as in the case of the two northern racers, paragons of natural grace and harmony. For in Oliver's rendering, American primitive involves a return to the perception of nature in its original simplicity, stripped of layers of prejudice and symbolism imposed by culture on the natural world. Such a perspective necessarily involves the poet in a dialogue with her predecessors. For me, it's almost impossible to read Oliver's snake poems without recalling Dickinson's A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. And this is the poem. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His note is suddenness. The grass divides with a comb, a spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. He likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn. Yet when a boy and barefoot, I more than once at noon have passed, I thought a whiplash unbraiding in the sun. When stooping to secure it, it wrinkled and was gone. Avoiding too easy association of the poem's story with the story of Eve's deception, Dickinson adopts a male persona. In the speaker's recollection of his boyhood encounters with snakes, the vulnerable child, more than once, assumed a snake to be a whiplash unbraiding in the sun, a toy to be picked up and enjoyed. Yet when stooping to secure it, it wrinkled and was gone. The psychic effects of the repeated childish disappointment are raised to ominous intensity in the final stanzas of the poem. Several of nature's people I know and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality, but never met this fellow, attended or alone, without a tighter breeding and zero at the bone. The opening of the poem is playfully stylized as a riddle, without mentioning the name of the creature. Its early quatrains describe the snake in terms of how he appears to the observer. Yet information about the specific name and variety of the snake is withheld from the poem, not really in play, but because the focus is on the elusiveness of the animal. The snake is so quick that his body remains practically invisible in motion, only the path of his movement through the grass shows. Moreover, his habits are erratic. Although he likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn, he can be also seen sunning in the open. Then, however, his appearance deceives. He looks like an inanimate object, not like a living creature. Description of the animal and its habits is coordinated with the story of the repeated disappointment of the boy, who instead of expected gratification is left with a sense of failed hope and loss. When the concluding phrase famously defines the psychosomatic effect of such betrayals of trust as a tighter breathing and zero at the bone, the meaning of the initially playful riddle is transferred into the sphere of the symbolic. The whole poem moves, like the snake, from the natural to the mythical reality. But it also moves with the speaker's progress from childhood illusions to confrontation with disappointment and failed hopes. Correspondingly, the very word snake changes its status from innocent answer to the riddle to unmentionable taboo word. Thus, Dickinson's poem confirms the validity of snake's symbolic meaning with the authority of personal story. Individual life and mythical paradigm correspond, and zero at the bone eventually feels like a cold touch of death, the final human loss, and according to the Bible, the result of Eve's deception by the snake. Dickinson, however, does not see expulsion from paradise of innocent trust as punishment for yielding to temptation. It is for her a painful, inevitable loss of naive vision. Marian Moore's whimsical poem, Snakes, Mongooses, Snake Charmers, and the like, wonders at the phenomenon of the animal's symbolization in practically all known cultures. I have a friend who would give a prize for those long fingers all of one length, those hideous bird's claws, for that exotic asp and the mongoose, products of the country in which everything is hard work. The country of the grass-getter, the torchbearer, the dog servant, the messenger bearer, the holy man. Engrossed in this distinguished worm, nearly as wild and as fierce as the day it was caught, he gazes as if incapable of looking at anything with a view to analysis. The slight snake rippling quickly to the grass, the leisurely tortoise with its pied back, the chameleon passing from twig to stone, from stone to straw, lit his imagination at one time. His admiration now converges upon this. Thick, not heavy, it stands out from its traveling basket, the essentially Greek, the plastic animal all of a piece from nose to tail. One is compelled to look at it as at the shadows of Alps, imprisoning in their folds like flies in ember the rhythms of the skating rink. This animal, to which from the earliest times importance has attached, fine as its worshippers have said, for what was it invented? To show that when intelligence in its pure form has embarked on a train of thought which is unproductive, it will come back. We do not know. The only positive thing about it is its shape. But why protest? The passion for setting people right is in itself an afflictive disease. This taste, which takes no credit to itself, is best. The speaker of the poem comments on the behavior of a friend watching a cobra in the snake charmer's basket. The friend is engrossed in this distinguished worm and gazes as if incapable of looking at anything with a view to analysis. His spellbound reaction is not only a personal characteristic contrasted with the speaker's distancing and distant rationality. The friend's fascination with various strange creatures of nature, now converging on the cobra in the snake charmer's basket, reflects the irrational but universal distinction that different cultures across world and time, from ancient Egypt, and asp, the word asp signals, the Cleopatra's asp, from ancient Egypt through India to ancient and Christian Europe, the various cultures have bestowed importance on that animal. The speaker has no intention of correcting her friend's attitude. She knows that analogously to the strangeness and mysterious purpose of the snake in the animal world, irrational behavior belongs to human nature. Hope of readjusting the attitude is suggested by the plasticity and circularity of the animal's object, the only positive thing about it. Its fine body may incorporate the principle that when intelligence in its pure form has embarked on a train of thought which is unproductive, it will come back. Thus, insisting on setting people right seems in itself as useless and irrational as the anomaly of the snake and of the human fascination with it. The speaker's program is to stand firmly by her own independent opinion. Why protest? The passion for setting people right is in itself an afflictive disease. Distaste which takes no credit for itself, to itself is best. Distaste for the distinguished worm, or distaste for human irrationality. In the end, Moore's poem is not really about the snake as a natural creature, but about the snake as a construct of various cultures resulting from fears and fascinations of universal human nature with mystery. Moore, the poet and speaker in the poem, balances that construct against her own appreciation of the snake as an aesthetic object, recreating the plastic animal in her poem through surprising, whimsical, wide-ranging associations. Thus the snake is seen in the charmer's basket, moving to the tune of his controlling instrument. One is compelled to look at it as the shadow of Alps, imprisoning their folds like flies in the rhythms of the skating ring. I'm stressing those far-ranging associations because Moore seems to suggest you can do anything, right, with the object. The imagination can change it into anything. Seen in those terms, the snake combines rhythm, power, and grace, qualities essential for Moore's art. The polarities of human attitudes, contradictions and riddles of nature and culture can be accommodated only within the freedom of rationally disciplined but firmly individualistic vision of the artist. In each of the poems discussed above, the visual image of the animal constitutes the center and springboard for reflection, even if the reflection remains largely implied. One could perhaps risk the suggestion that in the American tradition, the wildly practiced animal poem supplements the genre of a descriptive meditative poem originating in the 18th century, in which the poet renders, that's a quotation from David Perkins, the poet renders the place where he is, or the landscape before him, and then goes on to describe thoughts the scene suggests to him. The narrowed, and we think of elegy in the country, churchyard, Tintern Abbey, and those poems. The narrowed scope of vision in the animal poem is compensated for by the graphic visibility of detail and the resulting shift of balance in favor of the solidity of the physical object. Nevertheless, each of the poems demonstrates strong awareness that any representation of a wild creature, such as the snake, must deal with its culturally determined significance. The animal's physical reality, its cultural symbolism, press against each other. So it is perhaps not so surprising that the only poet in this company who was a trained biologist, and one may say professionally familiar with the physical and biological realities of the snake, represents the animal, first of all, as a plastic cultural construct. It's also connected with the time, right? with modernism and the aesthetic of modernism and the cult of art, right? The autonomy of art, I think. So another thing one could do with those poems is talk about the changing philosophical attitudes, or aesthetic attitudes, if you like. Moore's imperative as a poet is then to wrest from under the inherited, multivalent and multifaceted hybrid entity a fair distance, yet personal perception. She must turn the snake's plasticity into unmistakably individual creation, knowing that fascinations with mysteries of nature give rise to irrational mythical constructs. Thus Moore shifts the whole confrontation to the sphere of the aesthetic, bypassing issues of epistemology and religion. It is Dickinson and Oliver that seem to talk to each other more directly, as each addresses the linking of the snake with the biblical story of the fall and expulsion from paradise, while Dickinson reinterprets the religious myth in terms of its applicability to the overall pattern of individual psychic experience. Oliver insists on separation of the symbolic and the natural sphere, or rather, Because the symbolic meaning is so pervasive, she wants to go back to the innocent identity of the animal. Such a program opens towards the impossible ideal of returning to pre-cultural state of human awareness. Apart from the fact that holding wild nature in general, and any of its creatures in particular as model of human values and virtues, may be considered a highly problematic proposition, the glaring fact remains that no pre-cultural paradise can be accessed by man. Such aspirations must remain in the sphere of the desired and the postulated. That is a problem not only with much Oliver's poetry, but with most didactically colored environmental thinking. Still, poems are not to be judged on the viability of their intellectual propositions. For all three poets, describing the snake is in the first place an exercise in seeing, which reclaims the solid and sensual from abstraction and speculation. And that is also the discipline their poems teach to the readers. The grass dividing us with a comb, the feather of his tongue shooting in and out of his otherwise clamped mouth, those long fingers, all of one length, of the snake charmer playing his flute, are images that stay in the eye and shape the reader's sensitivity to the world around. Attention to what surrounds us and respect for the physical world and for life in its strangest, most alienating forms has become for many poets and writers a kind of spiritual exercise, a way of getting beyond the self and of grounding the increasingly mediated and speculative character of modern experience in the physicality of life. It seems that paradoxically, the sphere of the purely biological and physical becomes a refuge of contemporary transcendent imagination. In The Black Snake, a poem from Oliver's 1979 collection, 12 Moons, the speaker stops her car to pick up from the road the black snake run over by a truck. The cool and gleaming body of this dead brother makes her think about what connects all living creatures into a family, about the terrible weight of death, and about its equally powerful counterforce. I leave him under the leaves and drive on thinking about death, its suddenness, its terrible weight, its certain coming. Yet under reason burns a brighter fire, which the bones have always preferred. It is the story of endless good fortune. It says to oblivion, not me. It is the light at the center of every cell. It is what sent the snake coiling and flowing forward happily all spring to the green leaves before he came to the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Salska, for such a strikingly penetrating and subtle analysis of the poems, which I think made not only my skin creep listening to the analysis and imagining the images of these nicely, I won't use the oxymoron creature. Thank you. Any questions? Come on.
I believe it is of import that the speaker's friend is male in the poem. And, well, it seemed to me that she, as other modernist female poets, like Hilda Doolittle, for instance...
The sex is unspecified.
Well, it says he about him, that she's trying to reverse somehow the culturally appropriated gender roles, with man being irrational and the woman being,
rational.